Okay, this is part 2 of our rebake of our 3D scan, trying to get ready for some proper texturing where the normal maps and things flow nicely and there's no kind of crunchy seams like we are experiencing in Mixer. So we made this UV map, the instructions of where the image is supposed to be stuck to the model. We made this just by using Blender's sort of auto generation with Smart UV Map. It's not bad for sure, but I think we could do better if we make some decisions ourselves. So I'm going to select the object, press tab, go into edit mode, and now I'm going to select edge select mode. Let's see if we can think about how we want this cut so it won't be such an obtrusive seam. Because we had a seam here, two on the back, and then around the bottom. Now I think the bottom is going to just have to be sacrificed in a way. So I'm going to basically trace this outside loop and mark it as, imagine cutting with a pair of scissors. That's going to be our sort of dress pattern. So a little trick, if we want to select all of this, we could hold down Shift and click and click and click, but we can also hold down Control and click somewhere down the line. And we could try to just, if we want to go all the way around, we could try to click here and see what happens. But you'll see Blender is going to select the path of least resistance. So we want to kind of break this up into arcs as we walk around. Okay, again, it's a little too close, so we need to zoom in here, break it up, make sure we are clicking on the bottom, so you might need to rotate your view around. Okay, these straightaways are a little easier. You can probably take more at once. Okay, and we're almost back home. There we go. We have completed the whole loop. Let's go up here to UV and mark seam. And you'll see it turns red. If I click away now, it's going to stay red. We've marked the seam to be cut with our digital scissors. So if we select everything and go to UV Unwrap, not Smart Unwrap, but just Unwrap, we're going to see this is interesting. This might do something, but I think this is going to be really stretched. We see how some of these squares are so much smaller than these over here. Our bottom of our piece looks nice and organized, but this is pretty wacky. And you can also see, of course, as to be expected, our image texture is all over the place. So I'm going to turn this to the viewport shading mode where it's just the solid white, because that image texture is a little distracting now. So let's think about maybe we can make one more cut and get away with this. Let's start from the back, because maybe the back isn't the most interesting part of this, and maybe it won't be the kind of show side of it. So let's use our same technique of trying to trace up. I'm going to click on this vertical line, try to keep it symmetrical where we have a seam, if anything, and hold down Control and click. You can see we're selecting up, and I'm just going to try to trace a line to the top. Okay. So from there, I'm going to go to UV, mark seam. You can see it is marked in red. And then let's now select everything with A and go to Unwrap. And that is a much nicer UV map. Okay, you can see, if we select some of this, you can see there's the kind of front spine of this, but it's going to be continuous as we flow around the edge, so we're not going to have that sharp, kind of crunchy transition. So we should have to bake our maps again. We know the drill. We're going to go to the Shading Work tab, reveal our base scan, make sure we have this source texture selected, that's critical, and hold down Control, click on our low res scan, make sure we have our destination texture selected. One more time. Make sure we've got all of our baking settings as they are here. We want a little bit of max ray distance. And let's click bake and wait just a minute. Okay, we've got our new texture baked, and we can see there it showing up on the left. Quite a strange image, but I think that we're in business now. So we need to re-export these things so we can update them in Quixel Mixer. So over here in the 3-bar menu, I want to make sure I have my new high-res bake selected, the one we just baked. I'm going to go to image, and you see there's this asterisk here. That's warning us that something has changed, and indeed it has. We've baked a new map. So I'm going to click save, and I'm going to re-export our low-res scan model. So we'll hide the base scan. And here's our low res. We're going to go to File, Export, FBX, click on our Scan Bake FBX, and just make sure we have these settings down here. Selected objects only, mesh only, X forward, and hit export. Okay, let's flip back over to Quixel Mixer, and let's go back to Setup and Custom Model. We're going to navigate to our Scan Bake, and you're going to see things are already kind of breaking apart. Because we changed that model out, we also changed out its UVs. The UVs carry with a mesh wherever they go. So we're going to go to Layers, come over here to our mask, and we're going to refresh that, re-import that map. Okay, and you can see already things are looking pretty decent. That is a nice transition there. The lumps we have are from the texture itself. If we look at the back, we've got some issues, right? That's kind of to be expected. If we go back to PBR metalness, it's going to be a little janky in the back, but let's go ahead and work with the rest of our process that we're used to. Making a paint layer, bringing in our Albedo, our new high-res bake. Wow, that's looking pretty good. No, the seam back here doesn't bother me all that much, to be honest. Now, I failed to mention in the last video, we've got displacement here, preview displacement turned off. We actually don't want to use the displacement ultimately as a map here. Because we don't have enough geometry underneath of this. This is a low-res mesh. We can't add displacement or it's just going to break apart like this and look a little silly. So I'm going to uncheck that. While we won't be ultimately using the displacement map in our texture set, inside of Quixel Mixer we want to have displacement enabled somewhere in order to help generate our normal map, which we will be using. So let's go ahead and add some roughness. We're going to go to our paint layer and open up roughness. Select that same image texture. We can see if we flip to our roughness view, you can see it is being applied in black and white. Let's go back to PBR metalness and maybe we change our lighting where we have kind of some reflections in different places. Maybe we play with some of these blending modes. Maybe we invert it. It's worth playing around with. I'll leave it on normal for now. Let's see, if I look closely at this, we've got some strange artifacts going on, and honestly, it has to do with pixelization, but also from the way Blender was baking the textures, it was sort of projecting all of those color pixels out into space, so we get this kind of strange pattern look. And that might be of interest to you, but I want to see if we can break it up and kind of give this a little bit of refreshing. So we're going to add a noise layer. And I'm going to play with the amplitude and the octaves and the frequency. I'm going to bring the frequency way, way up. And I'm previewing this in a way where it's just like super, super intense. But we're going to bring it back down because I do want to preserve what's underneath of all this. We want to have some of that original information from the actual source. I'm going to bring the amplitude down now. Bring it to 0, we're back where we were. Bring it to somewhere around here. So now we've got some of our base height information, base normal information. If we go to normal, we can check this out. And we've stacked on some noise just to kind of fill in some of the weird patches. You can see those kind of funny tiles. Adding some noise, it will help break that up. Go back to our metalness. Maybe I want to come back here and play with the height range too. Let's make sure that really shows through under the noise. So I'll play with these sliders here. Funny, things are getting a little blurry, a little pixelated. I'm going to check and recheck that normalize. It seems to wake it back up. Bring that range in a little more. Yeah, it keeps getting blurry. I think it's re-rendering. Yeah, let's re-import that map. That looks okay. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. So let's get in here and keep playing. I'm going to take my height layer here and I'm going to hit Control D and I'm going to bring it up before that noise layer, it looks like. I'm going to turn off displacement and normals, and I'm going to turn roughness on, as well as albedo. I'm going to use this height map, kind of like what we did when we added some color to our landscape textures. I'm going to play with, let's just make it a bright color for now. And roughness I'm also going to make black, and we can see how the roughness is really kind of being added to the craters. Go over here and play with some of our range. I'll toggle that albedo on and off so we can just focus on our roughness for a moment. You can see the changes that are happening with our roughness. Let's bring our albedo back in. I'm going to play with some of the different modes here. Actually make this more of a purple. Okay, and we can also add, believe it or not, a liquid layer. Let's play with some of these things a little more. I'm going to take the surface threshold way, way down. And I'm going to play with some of this blur, the moist threshold, I think the radius. After playing with some settings, we've got something looking pretty interesting and definitely different than what it came from as that foam block. Something that I think we're using the powers of these kind of 3D tools to build fantasy into some of these projects and ideas. Here's our funny piece of foam we 3D scanned, and now it's got a whole new lease on life. So to export these, same as we've always done, we're going to go to specular. We're going to have the diffuse, roughness, and normal. We don't need the displacement. We don't need the ambient occlusion. We want to make sure we've got 4096 here. We don't need to re-export the model because we already have it, but we want to make sure our textures are placed in the same place as our model. So I can select that folder. Let's go ahead and keep that subfolder. And let's say export to disk. So back in Blender in the shading tab, we're going to bring in some of those new textures that we just baked. So we're actually going to replace this baked texture and come here and find diffuse. That makes sense from what we just did in Quixel. I'm going to hit Shift D to duplicate that, and I'm going to come in here and get our roughness map, bring it to roughness, Shift D again, and I'm going to make this our normal map, and I'm going to add another node here called normal map, connect normal to normal, and connect color to color. Now that is really looking like something. So that's an advanced technique of modifying our textures in Quixel Mixer. If you just want to use the default textures that come with your scan after you bring it in and cut off all the extra bits, that's totally fine too. But I want you to kind of have the agency around remixing these models and the textures they come with.